Center for Public Broadcasting, in cooperation with the Maryland State Department of Education, presents School Dialogue with your host, Alan Christian.
Alan Christian. This program is a special. That word is overused in broadcasting, but in this case it applies. School Dialogue is being carried live on television by the 4 stations of the Maryland Center for Public Broadcasting, and on radio by 14 local radio stations around the state, represented by those dots you see. We're delighted that these radio stations are willing to devote an hour of uninterrupted airtime to a subject that is of critical concern to us all. Our guests tonight are the 2 highest-ranking public school officials in the state. William Sykes is the president of the State Board of Education. The board is responsible for setting the state's educational policies and standards for pre-kindergarten through high school. It has 9 representatives statewide and is intended to be the voice of the public. However, the board has traditionally used its powers in a respectful partnership with local school boards in Maryland's 23 counties and Baltimore City. One of the state board's duties is to select Maryland's superintendent of schools. And in 1977, they picked our second guest, David Hornbeck. Mr. Hornbeck is the state's top-ranking public educator. It's his job to administer a large department which is charged with the promotion, development, and implementation of the state board's educational policies. In a few minutes, all of you in our viewing and listening audience will have a chance to ask questions of Mr. Sykes and Mr. Hornbeck in a sort of town meeting of the air. But before we begin, I'd like to offer some background. As we enter the 80s, Maryland's educators face numerous challenges. One is the problem of declining enrollments. Some would call it an opportunity rather than a problem. For now, surely we can reduce class size, upgrade teaching standards, and give our youngsters the quality education they deserve. A nice sentiment, but one we can't afford. It is more likely that these underutilized schools will be closed. But which ones? That's easy. The ones in other people's neighborhoods, not in ours. In short, fewer students will mean more controversy. Meanwhile, taxpayers are frustrated when they hear that schools are being closed and teachers are being laid off, while student test scores are declining and many graduating seniors can't read, write, or use simple arithmetic. The first step to solving the problem has been the requirement that students pass basic literacy tests. Many can't. Educators say it will take time to acquaint students with the material on the tests. But parents say, if you can read and write, you can read and write. Teaching the child the test doesn't prove the child has really been educated. The funding of education will continue to draw close scrutiny. Many rural areas feel slighted at the fact that more money per student goes to the metropolitan areas. But urban educators cite their own higher costs. Teachers, they argue, need bigger salaries in the cities and suburbs because of the higher cost of living there. Meanwhile, rural counties complain that it's tough to attract good teachers by offering low salaries. Slicing up the state educational pie will continue to produce some upset stomachs. These are just a few of the issues affecting education in Maryland. In the interview that follows, I'll focus on these and other topics. Mr. Hornbeck, Mr. Sykes, my pleasure. First question for you, Mr. Hornbeck. When you were designate, not yet confirmed to your job, in 1976, you were quoted as saying that the fundamentals of reading and writing and arithmetic were essential ingredients in your program. Yet recently, you have declined to reveal the test scores of 9th graders, assuming that their mathematical prowess is lacking. Is that correct? And 1980 compared to 1976, are we making little progress?
No, I think, in fact, we've made a good deal of progress over these last 3 or 4 years, and you're quite right in your quote from back in 1976, Rule 1, page 1. is reading, writing, and arithmetic. And in fact, take reading for just a minute. On the Maryland Functional Reading Test, between 1976 and this past year, the number of 11th graders that were able to successfully master the material as that test measures it had gone from 63% to 89%. Your reference to the math test doesn't have anything to do with whether reading, writing, and computing is important, less important, more important. It has to do with the manner in which, on a newly developed test, the young people across the state performed. They performed less well than we had expected. That raises one of two questions. It poses the possibility that the test itself has some problems. Alternatively, it poses the possibility that the youngsters don't know what the test was measuring. I want to know the answers to that.
Mr. Hornbeck, I have two questions here that are assumed to be the types of questions included in the mathematical proficiency test. These questions are from literature provided by your department. The first has three items: a pair of pants, a t-shirt, and tennis shoes, $3, $7.95, and $4.96, totaling $15.91. The second question on my list concerns total attendance at a baseball game, adding the simple sums of 44,876 and 39,357. Mr. Hornbeck, these seem like very simple, down-to-earth questions, and yet you're quoted as saying perhaps the students are not being taught mathematics in a way so they can answer these questions. What does that mean?
Well, I think that those two questions are of the type that appear on the test. One of the things that you find on tests is that no one or two questions are representative of the full range. Indeed, there are questions on the 9th grade test that are normally taught at, say, the 6th or 7th grade level. There are other questions on the test that students frequently don't encounter until the 10th, 11th grade level. And those two particular ones are obviously at the lower end of that scale.
My question then, Mr. Hornbeck, would be how many of the questions on the test are at the lower end of the scale?
I don't have any idea how many fall.
The reason I'm pressing in on this issue, you're also quoted as saying directly that the issue of being able to make change and or add supermarket prices might be functions not being taught in our system. What are they being taught, Mr. Hornbeck?
Well, it's frequently the case that simply being able to do the four functions of arithmetic, adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, we don't always translate that into the practical things of life. And one of the reasons, the principal reason indeed, that the board, together with myself, the staff of the department, people all across this state, initiated what we call Project Basic, is precisely because we think that we're not meeting those kinds of objectives with respect to all of the kids. And so I wouldn't want to pretend for a moment that all the youngsters across this state are able to do those things, and it worries me. At the same time, I think that it's fair to say that in the course of greater attention to the basics, to reading, writing, and arithmetic, that we are seeing school systems, we're seeing teachers, we're seeing parents, we're seeing students increasingly coping with that, and that's its whole intent.
Mr. Sykes, do you go along with the basic concept espoused by Mr. Hornbeck in his last answer that seems to say that a lot of the students are not getting a basic education?
I think when this board, the current board, adopted a position that there ought to be proficiency testing, that it ought to be done beginning at grade 1 through grade 12, and that there ought to be regular assessment of pupil progress, was a reflection of the concern on the part of the board about whether or not young people were achieving basic minimal competency prior to their being given the diploma that one gets when one finishes high school. We are not sure. That is why we initiated this process. That's why we intend to follow it very carefully.
Project Basic has been underway for some time. Are you beginning to get a direction for your comments. Will you be able to say definitively that it is the problem of the educator, or does it appear that the student represents the problem?
I think there is no one cause of the problem. I believe it is the educator to some extent. It is the pupil. It is also the society, represented by everything from the lack of parental control and the lack of parental direction to the influence of television to a whole variety of problems that confront the learner.
But you're prepared to say that there are some bad educators in this system.
Absolutely.
Now, I'd like to follow on with that. You're also quoted as saying that unless students reach a specific level of competence, it is your opinion that they should not graduate, and that any diploma or certificate should be withheld until they are competent. Is that a correct statement on your behalf?
That is a correct statement. There has been some criticism of the fact that a diploma or a degree or a certificate might be withheld from an individual because he or she has not achieved a certain level of competency. There's been some criticism of the whole concept of testing. There's been reference to the fact that all of those concepts are white middle-class concepts.
Are they?
The fact is that in this America, at this moment in time, this is a white middle-class America. These are concepts by which we as individuals have to live, and we ought to be preparing our students for that.
So you're saying all students should be prepared to live up to a standard established by the white middle class?
I'm saying all students should be able to live up to reality, and the white middle class is a reality in America.
You're also quoted as saying one of the ways we will decide which schools to close will be to depend on data provided by local governmental districts. Let me ask you a question in that regard. Won't all of the districts try and inflate their data in order to get somebody else's schools closed first?
As long as the local districts are providing 51% of the dollars used in supporting public education in this state, I think they are as interested or more interested in identifying those appropriate buildings to be closed than we are on the state level.
All right, Mr. Hornbeck, let's turn back to you on the issue of closing. How are you going to decide policy that will establish what schools are to be closed?
Well, there are a variety of factors that we want to give attention to, things like the use to which schools are put, the number of kids in a classroom. We don't want to see, for example, resegregation take place.